Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast. Today, I want to introduce you to Kathleen Somers. She's a debut author of Barely Visible, a book that completely touched my heart. It talks about her son, Jack, who was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And from the outside, Jack looks perfectly normal. He looks perfectly capable. He looks perfectly able to do all the things, but on the inside, he's struggling with regulation and with social interactions and not understanding what the cues are and how to deal with those things. She shares some seriously powerful moments when she was raising Jack, and she actually writes in the book what she wishes that she had done differently. So Kathleen, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here.
Of course. Okay, so let's get into it. So, you've written this book, Barely Visible, right? It talks about the journey that you had with Jack, raising your only son who was diagnosed with Asperger's. And I wanted to, if we go all the way back, what were the first things that you were noticing that you thought, oh, that's something that might be a red flag or something that you're not sure what's going on?
So, we never really, there wasn't ever one thing that we noticed, but, at 2.5 years of age, he was perfectly fine at home. He was a perfectly content, happy, smiling little toddler. Anytime we went out in public, he would do something, and it was almost as if he was asking, like he wanted negative interaction, and we didn't know what was going on. I mean, what toddler, is calculated in their interaction with strangers? So, at 18 months, 24 months of age, he just was fine at home, but in public, there was always this friction. And then at 4 years of age, he started developing these obsessive tendencies, which at the time we thought were really cute. Like he got hooked on accessories. Like he wanted to wear wristwatches all the time. He wanted to wear plaid shirts. Like it just kept changing from one thing to the next. It wasn't until he was kindergarten age that suddenly other people are viewing him and saying, okay, something's going on. Like he was aggressive in the classroom. He was disruptive. He couldn't sit still. He just wasn't doing what all the other kids were doing. He wasn't meeting milestones. And so it was at that point that his teachers, said, hey, we should do some evaluation. And he was evaluated not just at school, but by a pediatric neurologist who gave us this diagnosis. And this was 2007. Like no one was talking about autism. They definitely were not using the words Asperger's syndrome. And, we had no relationship with this doctor. He saw him 3 times. He saw Jack 3 times. He gave us this diagnosis, and there was no follow-up to say, like, okay, here's what this is. Here's what you might expect for the future. Here's things you could put in place now to deal with it. And so he's going through these evaluations at school, and these are the people that were seeing him day after day. And they said, yeah, he needs some accommodations in the classroom. Let's develop an education plan for him. But we don't think he has this, like nobody was talking about this autism. And these were the people that we trusted because they knew him. They had already known him for years. And so they said, we don't think he has this. So we just said, okay, he doesn't have this, whatever this is, he'll grow out of it. So that's, that was the beginning of our journey with Jack. Is he doesn't have this. Let's go from there.
I love it because I can definitely say from my own experiences when my son was diagnosed with autism that my husband had the exact same reaction as you. Like the doctors are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. This is, ridiculous. And I'm like, you might want to come to the park and have a look at what's going on, because apples ain't apples, and we're looking at two very, very different children. And I think that he just couldn't accept the idea that he was autistic. And so it was a journey that he needed to go on, just like I had to go on, to the point of acceptance, to the point of, okay, this is what's going on and we need to get behind this. But it takes time and it's not easy, especially in your situation where you've got, a trusted authority figure saying, I don't think so. And then another trusted authority figure saying, no, yeah, actually he does. I would, of course, most parents would want to lean on, this isn't really going to, no, we're just going to pretend that this is not happening. We're not going to deal with this because he's perfect. Because most parents do think their children are perfect. And I get it. It.
And not only that, what really set us on the wrong path was the fact that we got him engaged in organized sports, which he immediately became hooked on. He became obsessed with. And from our standpoint, it was like, okay, this is great. It's giving him an outlet for his energy. It's keeping him contained. He's interacting with other kids in a team setting. Okay, our life appears to be progressing like everyone else's life. He would go off to a regular school every day. He came home. We would go off to practice a game, sometimes both, and sometimes two of each. And we thought, okay, this is going to get us through. It made it easy for us to believe that our life was progressing normally, and eventually he would grow out of it. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
You say, in reality, his obsession with sports was more of that obsessive behavior, only that was the one that stuck. He became obsessive about baseball. And I don't mean obsessive in a bad way. It was obsessive, yes, but in essence, it was a great thing because he enjoyed the hell out of it. We enjoyed it. He was, like I said, he was interacting with other kids. So it seemed like this is such a good thing. And he was really good at it. Part of the reason he was so good was because he was so obsessive that he would practice over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so it was a mind game for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So can you just share with us, like, what were some of the struggles that you found, maybe from when he was from 4 years older, like upwards? What were the biggest struggles that you would say that you would share with, people that are listening today, especially considering he would have been deemed as high functioning, right? So what would that look like?
So the biggest struggle, the biggest problem was that we were given this diagnosis and we did nothing with it. Even if we trusted in his teachers and said, okay, we think they're right. Obviously that's what we said, even so we're going with that. We think they're right, but still we just let that diagnosis hang out there. And the biggest struggle was the fact that we never said, okay, well, let's just pretend that he's got this Asperger syndrome or autism. At the time, the two weren't even talked about in the same sentence. But okay, let's just research Asperger syndrome. If we had done that, it would have answered so many questions. It would have said, the information was there, and maybe it was in a very clinical form. Like in today's world, it's out there on social media. Like there was none of that going on in 2007. There was no Facebook. There was no internet. Therapists whose help we sought out, some of them said, we're not helping you, because they didn't know. They just didn't know. And so the biggest struggle was not educating ourselves, because if we could have done that, it could have changed so much. It could have changed his reaction to situations, it could have changed our reaction to other parents, to teachers, to coaches. It would have changed how we taught him. We have spent 25 years backpedaling essentially. So that was the hardest part.
I hear you completely. And it's hard to do the research, right? Because when you see it in black and white and you read it and you're
Oh
like,
my goodness.
oh, I don't want to deal with this. This is not what I want to hear. And you read those dot points, and the dot points are exactly like what your child is presenting. And you're like, it's like the knife to the heart. And it's really hard to process that information. So I don't begrudge you for not going into it further, because it's a coping mechanism as well, right? It's a way of, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to put it to the side so we don't have to, learn everything there is, because it's hard.
Right. Well, my advice to any parent today, when I read those things now, it is so much harder than if I had, and I'm saying this in hindsight, but I read them now and I'm like, oh my God, if I had just read this, if I had read this 20 years ago or 18 years ago, maybe 5 years after that, I would have jumped on board. But here I am 25 years out and I read this stuff and I'm like, oh my God, it's just so him. And having that information could have gotten me on board much sooner than I did.
Okay, so I want to ask you one thing. So was there a moment when you were raising Jack where he taught you something specific? Share with the listeners.
Well, like I said, so much of our journey has been hindsight. So he has taught me things that I didn't learn until much later. But here's a perfect example. Jack is incredibly heat sensitive. Like, get into a car, hot summer day, get into a car and the air isn't on. He immediately freaks out, starts twisting all the knobs, like the air can't get on fast enough. I don't fare well in the heat, right? So I get into a hot car and I'm like, I need air, but I don't freak out because I have that ability to control myself. My husband, complete opposite. It couldn't be hot enough for him. So my husband and I were actually going somewhere one afternoon and it was a warm day. We get in the car and it is hot. And I say to him, could we put the air? He puts the windows down. And I said, could we put the air on? I'm really warm. And he's like, it's really not that bad. And it was in that moment that I thought to myself, I'm really uncomfortable. It's not up to him to decide, how the environment should be. And it was in that moment that I realized exactly how Jack feels. He interprets the world in his own way. And for me to say to him, oh, it's really not that bad, to take that away from him is completely wrong. He has the right to experience every moment of his life in whatever way that takes shape. It might not be, he might be extreme, but that's who he is. So Jack didn't actually teach me that. It was just, this coming to awareness of how he responds to different situations that made me realize, oh my goodness, everything I have to take into consideration, just like you would take into consideration how your husband feels. He might hate having a surprise party for his 40th birthday, right? You know what I mean? And it was that moment that I recognized that for me to take away discomfort is just as horrible as squashing a moment of celebration because it's too noisy. Do you know what I mean?
That is a mic drop right there. Right there is a mic drop, because it makes parents understand what it looks like from the other side, especially if you are neurotypical. And there is no way that you can fathom how this neurodivergent child is experiencing the world. We just can't. Like, as much as we have so much empathy for them, but we don't truly understand what it is to walk in their shoes, because we can't understand what all those sounds are. And we watch all the movies and we see how all the
Right.
sounds, and it's really loud, but talking about it and watching a movie is very, very different to living it day to day. And so having that experience, I'm so pleased to have that experience, because I love that, because it showed to you exactly what he was going through and
Yeah.
what that looked like. And that you're absolutely right. Just because you might not feel as hot as he is doesn't mean that he shouldn't have the air on, right? Like, it's air
Right.
conditioning. Like, it doesn't really matter. So
Right.
yeah, I love that. I love
And,
that.
it just, in trying to understand him, I have learned so much about myself and so much about the interaction between humans. And in today's world where, the world is changing at an exponentially faster rate than it ever has in human history. And traditional education is going to go out the window. The one thing that is never going to change is human beings and our needing to navigate one another and interact with one another. What we should be focusing on in schools is teaching children how to interact with all different types of personalities. Like, okay, acceptance of autism. Autism should no longer even be considered something different. We are all different and we all need to learn how to navigate one another. And if that would be true autism acceptance, is teaching children how to, neurotypical children, well, that kid doesn't think like I do, so let me understand that. How do I interact with him so that they can be, on the same plane?
And it's true around the idea, like, if you look at the stats, in Australia, it's 1 in 40. In America, it's like 1 in 30. So,
Mhm.
like, what do the stats need to be before we even consider what that looks like, right? And it
Right.
becomes such a high number that it absolutely, like we were saying offline, Jack went to so many social skills groups for him to learn how to interact with neurotypical children. But why aren't neurotypical children having, I'm not saying classes, but like any information, like you just said, about interacting with neurodivergent, children, adults, whatever it is, and what does that look like? So, and for anyone, even whether you're deaf, whether you're Down syndrome, whatever the disability is, having an understanding of how to interact is so, so important.
And I guarantee you that 1 in 30, 1 in 36, or 1 in 40, whatever that number is, I guarantee you that is much, it's probably more like 1 in 20, because, Jack could very easily have gone undiagnosed. And there are a lot of children out there whose parents, you know, maybe they can't afford to have a diagnosis, or maybe they're in a situation where their kid is going unnoticed. And, or maybe they just don't want to get a diagnosis because they're, Jack was so, he was always in normal classes. He was always interacting on normal sports teams. He's he's got a college degree, he drives a car, he's got a job, he still plays sports. Like, there are children out there that technically are on the spectrum but haven't been diagnosed. And so it almost makes me say, why is there even a line? Why is there even a statistic? We are all different. We're just all different.
100% on that. What is your one thing I'm interested to hear, because you wrote it so well. You wrote the book so incredibly well, and I urge everyone to read it. I think it's so, so important. But what would you say is your biggest fear right now?
My biggest fear is that I have done my best to give him all the tools that he needs to self-advocate, but he does not want, he wants to be seen like every other young adult. And so it's up to him to just to disclose I have a disability or to keep it under wraps and try to hold it all together. And there are, pros and cons for both sides. And I keep telling him, like, the minute you disclose a disability, you are starting from a point of being different and you're automatically discounted from opportunities. So I don't want to see him do that because I know he's capable. But does the next person know he's capable? But if he doesn't disclose the disability, then eventually a mistake is made. And I keep telling him, you're going to make a mistake or you may make a mistake. And I can't guarantee you that it's going to be met with understanding or forgiveness. And do you want to lose your job because you made a mistake that, you couldn't help? But if your boss had known, then it wouldn't be an issue. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
100%, 100%.
it's just such a fine line. So my biggest fear is that he's going to miss out on opportunities that he deserves because he's not able to just go out and be himself.
Yeah, totally understand that. I want to refer to the book because I have my little dog ears. I've dog-eared so many pages, but I want to read part of it. Let me get to the right page. And it talks about, in the beginning, you were very concerned with regards to giving medication to Jack, right? Because obviously he was dealing with some anxiety and I think some OCD. Is that correct? Or am I?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And so I really want to say, I want to read this part because there are so many parents who struggle with this idea of putting their child on medication. And I want to read this very short excerpt. Jack had started on the lowest dosage, so the obvious next move would be to increase it to see if he would experience even more success. It meant another 3 or 4 weeks of waiting, but it was worth the wait. The increased level brought more positive results, and our fears of how medication might impact Jack were quelled. Jack's improved behavior, by no means perfect, let's not get carried away, was proof that, after fighting the idea for a long time, we had made the right decision. It was okay to have taken this route. Jack wasn't becoming a zombie. Instead, he was beginning to resemble an average, bearable 12-year-old boy. And I think that that's something that needs for parents to listen to. Now, I'm no doctor, so obviously consult with your doctor whether your child should be on medication or not. But I know that a lot of parents have so much deep-seated guilt and grief when they have to talk about putting their child on medication. And I was so pleased to see that you wrote that, because at least it gives almost like a permission to parents to go, okay, well, let's give it a go and let's just sort of see how we go. And not be so afraid of it. And sometimes the things that we're most afraid of are the things that could potentially help the most. Not always, but in this case, it did really well. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important.
Thank you. And he still is on the same medications that we put him on then, and it's not like we just put him on them and said, oh, everything's great. We have tried multiple times to wean him off one and then wean him off another. And we ultimately, and he's an adult now and he can make that decision. And he has said, yeah, I want to try and get off the medication. And inevitably, we every time have come back to, it's beneficial to him. He doesn't feel physically, like it doesn't impact him negatively in a physical way. Mentally, he feels better when he's taking the medication. It works for him. Certainly as his mother, I saw the benefits and I still see the benefits. So, I'm not a huge proponent of medication. My doctor's always, my doctor wants to prescribe every medication in the world. And I'm like, well, I'll try it, but, and I rarely stay on anything that they prescribe. But in his case, it worked. And I don't know that that's the case for every child, but it's worth the try.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's another part in the book that I want to share with parents because I think it's something that comes up quite a lot. And it talks about how there is a particular time that Jack is on the baseball field, and you describe it as this was more than Jack just having a bad day. Something had changed. It was as if he had developed baseball amnesia. Now, can you talk about that? Because I know people who maybe their child is learning letters or numbers, and then, you know, they've retained that information, and then the next day it's completely gone. And like, so can you just talk to that a little bit?
So that was not just exclusive to sports. When Jack was 6, he taught himself how to write cursive, and he was forming these beautiful letters, and he had this like unbelievably perfect printed letters, like penmanship. And then all of a sudden one day he just couldn't do it anymore, and his handwriting went back to chicken scratch. And with baseball, you know, here's a kid who immediately he fell in love with baseball right from the start. And I had a membership to the local sports facility so that he could use the batting cages for hours on end. I mean, he was the starting pitcher on every team he played on. He was hitting home runs regularly. Autism impacts your gross motor skills, which we had no idea about because we didn't educate ourselves. But that's what was happening. Is he would go out on the field, and something that physically he had trained himself to do perfectly would suddenly be elusive because of some, you know, misfire in his brain. And it you know, it reared its ugly head in many ways, the handwriting being an exact example of another way that it did that. And, you know, we didn't understand that. And so we just assumed it was like, oh, he's just having an off day, you know, like the major league players, you know, some days they just can't hit. And that's what we just assumed, was that it was just, you know, he had lost. But even if we had understood it, I don't know that that's something, like, I think that is just inherent in autism. And I don't know that that's something that you can compensate for.
No, I wanted to raise it because I think it was a powerful thing that it's not talked about as much.
Right.
And I think it's really important because parents, I no doubt, are, like you said, scratching their head going, hang on, you had mastered this yesterday and now today you don't understand it. What is going on? Like, and it just shows the power of the brain and the power of what can happen if I don't know how to rectify that, but I've just, you know, is this something that is quite common? Is it something that you see in a lot of autistic kids? It's something that parents need to have that education about because, like I said, it's not talked about as much. Then go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, and the hard part about that was that we hadn't disclosed to anyone, like his teammates, his coaches, that there was this thing hanging out there in the ether because we hadn't embraced it. So that made it doubly confusing, was that, you know, his coaches who depended on him, you know, granted he's 12 years old or 13 years old, but, you know, he was this little star. And it's like they were very confused by it. It's like, how, you know, he was fine yesterday. What's going on? And we didn't have an explanation for it. And I feel like his entire life we have been walking around with no explanations until now. But the hard part about now is that he is so neurotypical in most respects, yet he's not. And it's like, do you want to in now's world, do you want to be able to say something? It's this very difficult gray area that we exist in.
And that leads me to my next portion of the book. So if Angela were alive, she would be a tremendous source of tension because of her immense needs. But people wouldn't look poorly on us as if we had failed. On the contrary, They would take pity on us and treat us kindly because her disability would be apparent. They would see it. Jack's disability isn't so readily apparent, even to those who have been around him for years. What you see on the surface indicates the interaction with him should match up to what is generally expected. But interaction with Jack almost always guarantees friction. And I love that because we all know, we've all seen the memes, right? That, autism doesn't have a look, right? But if you look at, there's so many young, especially young boys and young girls, I would definitely say that as well, young children who look so typical, right? And there's that perception that, okay, well, great, they must be typical. But on the inside, they're trying to keep it all together. And I understand that autism doesn't have a look and it's not like a Down syndrome. And I understand all of that stuff. But I read that from the point of view where I look at my beautiful angel boy, and he was non-speaking until he was about 5.5. And in kinder, even though he looked typical, there was that pity that came, that
right.
It's almost like he had an intellectual disability, right? Or that he was just not up to scratch. And it was this I was like, there's no pity needed. Like, we don't need the pity. But I could see it from where you were writing it and how you were writing it, because he looked so typical and he acted so typical until obviously something had happened.
Yeah, and it makes me question, where is that line? Like, why is there even a line? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, so if we had had our first baby, people would have been, "Oh, I'm so sorry," like, and I still would have responded like, "Well, don't pity me," It is what it is, but he's alive in this world and he has to navigate this world, and there is this reaction from the world that you're supposed to meet A, B, and C. And if you don't meet one of those points, then, there's friction. and I don't know what the answer is. I don't, I have been trying to navigate it for all these years. Obviously, I've become significantly better at it because I don't want, he's got a hard enough time dealing with the world at large. He doesn't need it coming from his mother, who he trusts and he counts on. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't.
No,
I wish
me
I
either.
Did.
I wish I did.
No.
I wish I did too. And this is the last quote of the book, which I just love. His Asperger's syndrome is always right there on the surface, but still, it's so hard to see clearly. Outwardly, he appears that he is moving through life fairly well. In reality, he's moving along blindly. He is always going to be stuck halfway between assisted and accomplished. No one offers him the assistance he needs because no one can see that he needs it, and no one understands why he can't accomplish more because they can't see that he's trapped in a place by an abstract force that he can't control. Oh, mic drop again. Like, can we just stop with the mic drops? Okay, like, but it's true. Like,
it is true.
So much there, especially for a lot of the kids who are able to go to school, who, can do the homework, who can do all the things, but then come home and then have like a nervous breakdown when they're at home because they've just been holding it together for so long. And then they just get home into the safe space and just let it all go. And I think it's really important for parents to know that there is a lot that they're trying to manage, and we don't give them credit for that most of the time because we're so busy like, life is busy, right? We don't recognize all the things that they have to deal with. So I just think it's so important that we can give them a break, but we can also give ourselves a break.
Absolutely. I mean, we are all human, and it doesn't change. So, he's 25 now. It hasn't changed. So embracing it, and like I said, navigating, like us learning how to navigate one another in a marriage. You need to learn how to navigate your partner, because Life isn't always perfect. Not everybody is on the same page at every moment of every day. And it's no different with children, neurotypical or, neurodivergent. It's just trying to put yourself in their space. How are they feeling? And it's just like, my 92-year-old mother who every day is complaining, I'm so lonely. It's like trying to navigate her is trying to put myself in her space and understand what she's feeling. It's no different with autistic children, autistic people. And that's why I feel so strongly that in schools, all children should be learning how to interact with all different types of people. Like that is going to be so key in this world that is changing so quickly.
And if it's one thing we need more of, it's more compassion, right?
Oh,
it's more understanding. It's more
patience.
All of it. All of it. We're so quick to jump to conclusions, right? Or so quick to jump to judgments or reactions or all of that sort of stuff. So I love it. I think we could do a dose of love, would be helpful.
It would be good for everyone.
Yeah, for everyone. One more question before we go to the next topic is, what is your biggest hope right now?
My biggest hope is that Jack will find his voice, that he will gain the confidence to just say, this is who I am and this is what it comes with. And I need your help in these areas. I'm fine in these areas. I don't want him to miss out on opportunities because he doesn't have the confidence to just be who he is and be fine with that. So my biggest hope is that he will find his voice.
And that's a hard one. I think it's hard for every child, right?
For every person.
Yep. To find their voice and to really step into that authentic place where they can be it and they can say it. I think, and as I can tell you right now, Kathleen, as I'm getting older, I'm like, I just don't have time for that people pleasing crap anymore. So like,
right. Exactly. Yes. It's the truth. It's, when I look at all his struggles, when I look at everywhere we have been and where we have arrived at, I'm like, really, it's the same for everyone. It might be more extreme for a child who's on the spectrum or, but the challenges are all the same. And it comes down to being self-aware. And if we can teach them to be self-aware, then they can have the confidence to say, this is what I need. This is what I don't need. This is how I'm going to move forward. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry about that, but this is what I need to do for myself.
Yeah, 100% on that. I love it. I love it. So guys, this is the book, Barely Visible. It is such an amazing read. You should definitely get yourself a copy because it shares so much around like learning the lessons that you have instilled in there and the things that you look back in hindsight and go, what about this and what about that? And we could have done this differently. And it's just so well written. And I don't want to give anything away, but the first chapter had me in complete and utter tears and rocking back and forth in my seats. But, I don't want to give anything away. Now, you guys are in luck because Kathleen is offering to give away 10 Amazon vouchers for the first 10 people that reply either on here live or on a post that I will be creating shortly. And the Amazon card will be sent to your email and you have obviously like a voucher code that you can use to purchase the book. It is definitely a worthwhile read. It is so interesting. And I think that there's a lot of, just advice and wisdom that has come through the pages that you can read and just go, okay, I'm not in this alone. This is what's going on. Let's get on board. And I'm just a voracious reader anyway. So I just love reading and just learning from other people's experiences because that's how we grow as a human. So if you are interested, please drop the word book. If you're live, drop the word book. And if you're I'll be creating a podcast with the same code book and she'll be giving away 10 vouchers. But before we wrap up, Kathleen, is there anything that you want to share with us?
just that I am so grateful for you and for everyone else that is, putting a voice to all these children. Unfortunately, my son grew up in a time where it wasn't yet really talked about, and I had to learn everything the hard way by pulling my hair out. And I'm just so grateful that now the tide is changing in the right direction. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you for writing the book. My goodness, it's been amazing. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing if you have any more books coming out or just life in general. I think you're amazing, and I think that what you've done with Jack is so incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, Kathleen. I'll talk to you
You
soon.
too. Thanks.
Bye.